The beam of the balance never trembles, and the feather always waits. But the heart on the other side, the heart that holds every deed of a lifetime, is heavier than any stone. The god with the jackal head, the one who guards the scales, does not judge the dead, he judges the wicked. And that distinction changes everything you thought you knew about the final journey. We are told that death is the great equalizer, that every soul faces the same trial. But the truth is far more precise and far more terrifying, because the scales do not measure life, they measure worth. To pass, the heart must be lighter than the feather of truth. But what does that mean for the thief, the liar, or the murderer? And what does it mean for the person who simply made mistakes? The answer lies in the silence of the Hall of Two Truths, and it begins with a single, unshakable fact about the creature who holds the scales. We all think Anubis weighs the heart of every person who dies, the good and the bad alike. But the reality is that the weighing ritual was reserved for those whose lives were already suspected of being corrupt. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul had to navigate a treacherous path through the Dot, the underworld, and only those who reached the final judgment were worthy of the scales. If you were unworthy, if your name was erased from the offerings, you were devoured before you ever stood before the jackal, torn apart by demons in the darkness, your existence forgotten for eternity. The judgment of Anubis, the psychopomp, the opener of the way, was a privilege for the righteous, not a sentence for the damned. The wicked who managed to slip past the guardians faced the true test, but the most evil souls were often destroyed long before they could even speak their names to the divine assessor. The weight of the heart was not a metaphor for sin. It was a literal measurement of the soul's integrity, and the feather of Maat was not just a symbol of justice. It was the embodiment of cosmic order itself. When the heart was placed on the scale, it was not being compared to a standard of goodness. It was being weighed against the entirety of creation, against the very principle that kept the stars in the sky and the Nile in its banks. A heart that was heavy with guilt, with falsehood, with cruelty would sink, dragging its owner down to the jaws of Ammit, the devourer of the dead. But a heart that was light, purified by the rituals of mummification and the spells of the Book of the Dead, would rise to meet the feather, allowing the soul to pass into the field of reeds. The precision of this test was absolute, and the God who guided the process was not a merciless judge, but a meticulous technician, a guardian of a process that could not be cheated. Consider the story of a single scribe, a man named by the texts as Ani, whose papyrus scroll is one of the most complete records of the judgment we possess. He was not a king or a general. He was a royal scribe, a man of moderate status, but his heart was full of the small sins of everyday life, the neglected duties, the petty lies, the moments of greed. When he stood before the scales, his heart trembled, not because it feared the god, but because it knew its own weight, the accumulated debris of a human existence. The spells he had commissioned, the amulets placed over his mummy, they were not bribes for the gods. They were declarations of his own innocence, protestations that he had not committed the sins he was accused of. He had to name every sin he had not committed, from stealing sacred property to cursing the gods, and if he lied, the heart itself would betray him by shifting its weight. The drama of that moment, the silent prayer of a man who knew his own flaws, is the true heart of the myth, a story about the anxiety of being truly known. The most counterintuitive fact about this entire process is that the wicked, the truly irredeemable, were not the ones who faced the feather, because they were already lost, their souls annihilated in the dark places of the Dot. The judgment of Anubis was, in a way, a mercy, a final chance for the flawed but fundamentally good soul to prove its worth before the divine tribunal. The ancient Egyptians did not believe in eternal punishment. There was no burning lake or demonic torture in their afterlife, only the complete and total erasure of existence. The worst fate was not suffering. It was being forgotten, and the scales served as the last bastion against that oblivion. Think of it like a school examination that only the best students are allowed to take. The failing students are expelled before they even reach the exam hall. The ones who sit the test are the ones who have a chance to pass, and the weight of the feather is the difference between a lifetime of peace and a second death. But there is a darker layer here, a truth about the myth that is rarely discussed, and it concerns the nature of the deceased who faced the trial. The heart was considered the seat of the intellect and the will, the true self, and the weighing was a psychological test as much as a moral one. A person who had lived in denial, who had refused to accept the consequences of their actions, would have a heavy heart because it was burdened by unacknowledged guilt. Only the person who had truly integrated their experiences, who had confessed their sins and received absolution, could face the scales with a heart light enough to pass. This is the paradox. The wicked were defined not by their crimes, but by their inability to confront them, and the judgment was a mirror held to the soul. The god Anubis, with his black skin, the color of fertile soil and mummified flesh, was not punishing, he was revealing, exposing the truth that the soul had hidden from itself. The ritual of the weighing was performed with the most exacting precision. The statue of justice with her blindfold. The jackal crouched at the base of the scales. The devourer waiting with bated breath. Anubis, the son of Osiris, the master of embalming, was the one who touched the balance to ensure it was steady, his hand guiding the scales to an exact equilibrium. The deceased had to recite the negative confessions, 42 declarations of innocence, each one addressing a specific sin, and each declaration was spoken to a different god. If the heart was heavy, the devourer would consume it, and the soul would die a second time, this time for good, ceasing to exist in any form. The Book of the Dead, the collection of spells and incantations, was not a map to paradise. It was a manual for this trial, a script that the soul had to perform perfectly. The spells were written on papyrus, on tomb walls, on amulets, and they were designed to be spoken aloud by the deceased, but they were also written to be heard by the gods. This was a legal proceeding, a trial before a court of divine beings, and Anubis was the clerk of the court, the one who verified the evidence. The heart was the transcript of the life, every thought, every word, every deed recorded in its flesh, and the feather was the standard of truth against which it was measured. There was no cross-examination, no defense attorney, only the silent testimony of the organ that had beaten in the chest of the deceased. The verdict was absolute, and the execution of the sentence was immediate. The devourer waited only a breath away from the scale. This was justice without appeal, a system designed by a civilization that understood the finality of judgment. Here are the facts that shape this mythology, each one a stone that builds the great pyramid of the afterlife. The feather belonged to Ma'at, the goddess of truth, order, and justice, and her feather was the only counterweight to a human soul. Anubis was the god of mummification, and his jackal head was a symbol of the cemeteries where the dead were buried, the guardians of the necropolis. The devourer, Ammit, was a composite creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, the three most dangerous animals in Egypt. The Hall of Two Truths was the name of the judgment chamber, a place of immense spiritual significance, and it was here that the fate of the soul was decided. The negative confessions were 42 in number, each one a declaration of a sin not committed, from not stealing to not being arrogant. The deceased had to address each of the 42 assessor gods by name, a feat of memory that required preparation. The heart was returned to the body after the weighing, so that the soul could live again in the afterlife. The judgment was not a punishment, it was a purification, the final stage of a long and dangerous journey. and Anubis was the guide who saw the soul through to the end. So we return to the beginning, to the question of who truly faced the scales, and the answer resolves the mystery with a clarity that cuts through the fog of popular culture. The wicked were not judged because they were already condemned, and the dead were not judged because death was only the beginning of the journey. The judgment was for the living, for the soul that was still capable of change, still capable of becoming light enough to pass the test. The balance of Anubis is a mirror held up to the self, a reminder that we are the ones who weigh our own hearts through our actions. The feather does not judge, it only reflects, and the heart is the only thing that can make itself heavy. If you were to stand before the scales tonight, with no spells and no amulets, what would the balance reveal about the weight you carry?